Yo, yo, yo. What is up, Street Hoops Nation? It's your boy Dre, and I need you to put down whatever you're holding right now, because the Cincinnati Bengals just handed us one of the wildest quarterback room storylines of the entire offseason. And no, I am not talking about Joe Burrow's next contract or his golf game. I am talking about a depth chart bombshell that's about to leave a 19-year NFL journeyman out in the cold. Right as another completely separate rumor tries to convince you the Bengals are secretly plotting to trade away their franchise quarterback to the San Francisco 49ers. Two stories. One quarterback room. And by the time I am done breaking this down for you, piece by piece, you are going to understand exactly why one of these headlines is pure internet noise designed to farm clicks, and why the other one might actually cost a man his roster spot before training camp even gets rolling in earnest. I'm Dre, this is Dre Talk Sports, and if you are not subscribed yet with notifications on, fix that right now, because you do not want to miss what's coming in this quarterback saga. Let's get into it, because there is a lot to unpack. Let's rewind the clock, because context is everything here. Back when free agency opened this offseason, the Bengals really only had one true question mark sitting at the quarterback position, and it was not Joe Burrow. Everybody in football, from Cincinnati to Seattle to wherever you're watching this from, knows Burrow is the guy. He is the unquestioned face of that franchise, a former number one overall pick who has already thrown for more yards in his career than most Hall of Fame quarterbacks managed at the same point in theirs. The real question heading into this offseason was who backs him up. Because, and Bengals fans know this better than absolutely anyone, Burrow has missed serious chunks of time in two of his last 3 seasons. Wrist injuries, calf injuries, the turf toe saga a few years back. When your franchise quarterback's health has become this much of a recurring storyline, the backup spot stops being a luxury item on the roster. It becomes survival. It becomes the single most important non-starting job in the entire building. And that uncertainty is exactly what set this entire quarterback room drama in motion months before any of us were even talking about it. Here's where it starts getting interesting. When free agency first opened up, Joe Flacco. Yeah, that Joe Flacco. The ageless assassin who has been terrifying opposing defensive coordinators since before some of you watching this were even born, actually went out and explored the idea of leaving Cincinnati entirely to go compete for a starting job somewhere else in the league. Think about that for a second. The Bengals did not actually know in real time whether their proven been there done it. Ice in his veins backup quarterback was about to walk right out the door. So what do you do as a front office when you are staring down that kind of uncertainty at the most important position on the field? You get insurance. You do not sit around and hope it works out. And that is exactly what Cincinnati did when they went out and signed journeyman quarterback Josh Johnson to a 1-year deal. Now let me put some real respect on Josh Johnson's name for a second, because this man's career is basically an NFL folktale at this point. Drafted in the 5th round all the way back in 2009 by Tampa Bay, bounced through more organizations than I can count on 2 hands, sometimes signing with a team on a Tuesday just to be active for a Sunday game because somebody got hurt. 2 separate stints with the Washington Commanders, including as recently as the 2025 season. He even went out and played in the Alliance of American Football and later the XFL, just to keep his football dream alive during a stretch when the traditional league had no room for him, before eventually clawing his way back onto an NFL roster. This is a man who has survived nearly 2 decades in the single, most physically brutal, hyper-competitive professional sport on the planet through pure grit, professionalism, and being exactly the kind of guy every quarterback room wants sitting in that meeting room, because he makes everybody else around him sharper. When Cincinnati first signed him, there was a real, legitimate belief inside that building that if Flacco walked, Josh Johnson could be next in line as Joe Burrow's primary backup heading into the regular season. That was not a throwaway signing. That was a front office covering a real gap. But, and this is where the plot twists on us, so stay with me, everything changed. Joe Flacco decided to come back home to Cincinnati after putting together a genuinely impressive showing throughout the 2025 season. And I want you to really sit with what that means, Because the Bengals front office got exactly what every team in this league dreams about at the backup position. A battle-tested, Super Bowl-winning veteran who already knows the offense inside and out, already knows the locker room, already has real chemistry with these receivers, and has already proven on an NFL field that he can step in cold off the bench and win football games at a genuinely high level. That is not a hypothetical. We saw it happen. And the moment that Flacco deal got done, Josh Johnson's entire situation flipped overnight, whether anybody said it out loud or not. According to Spotrac, this man has earned north of $13 million across the entirety of his NFL career, which honestly should tell you everything about how respected he's been around the league, even without ever becoming a full-time starter. His current Bengals deal reportedly includes $200,000 guaranteed. That is real money by any normal person's standard, but in this league, guaranteed money does not equal roster security, and that right there is the coldest, most brutal part of this entire business. You can do everything right and still get squeezed out by a roster math problem that has absolutely nothing to do with your talent level. Now here's what's got fans buzzing across social media over the last several days. Chris Rowling over at Bengals Wire dropped a projected 53-man roster, and in that projection, Cincinnati carries just two quarterbacks into the regular season, Joe Burrow and Joe Flacco. That means Josh Johnson, according to this particular projection, does not make the final cut. And if you think that number alone is harsh, wait until you hear what John Sheeran over at A to Z Sports thinks about Johnson's odds. Sheeran reportedly gave Johnson only about a 5% chance of sticking on Cincinnati's final active roster this season. 5%. That is ice cold, and it is the kind of number that gets circulated all over Bengals Twitter within minutes of dropping. His reasoning, though, actually makes a lot of logical sense once you walk through it slowly. Johnson was originally brought in as insurance before Flacco ever re-signed. The instant Flacco came back into the fold, Johnson effectively became a third-string quarterback on a team that historically, going back years under this front office, almost never keeps three quarterbacks on its active 53 unless a string of injuries forces their hand late in camp. So let's just sit with that for a second, because this is the part of the story that I think most casual fans are going to completely miss if they are only skimming headlines. This is not a situation where Josh Johnson did anything wrong. This is not a talent evaluation problem, and it is not some locker room issue you have not heard about. This is a pure numbers problem, a roster construction problem, and honestly, it might be the single coldest part of professional football. Sometimes you get squeezed out not because you failed at anything, but because somebody else's return simply made you unnecessary through no fault of your own. That is the reality Josh Johnson is reportedly staring down right now, according to these two independent projections landing in basically the same place. Now, I want to be crystal clear here, because accuracy actually matters to me, and I am not going to feed you a false headline just to get a reaction out of you. As of right now, this is a projection, not a confirmed roster cut. Nobody has been released. Nothing official has come down from the building. This is analysts reading the tea leaves based on depth charts, contract structure, and Cincinnati's long-term roster building tendencies. But when two separate outlets, working independently of each other, land on the exact same conclusion within days of one another, that tells you something real is brewing beneath the surface, whether it becomes official this week or not, until final cuts. And here's a little silver lining for Josh Johnson. If this does eventually go down the way these projections are suggesting, his story does not have to end in Cincinnati. There is still a very real path where he lands on the practice squad if the Bengals want to keep him close as emergency depth, or another franchise around the league scoops him up for a genuine backup competition somewhere else entirely. 19 years in this league does not happen by accident, and it does not happen without a reputation that precedes you. Teams around this league still value exactly what Johnson brings to a quarterback room: professionalism, experience, the ability to walk into a completely unfamiliar building on a Tuesday and be functional by that Sunday if disaster strikes. If Cincinnati does move on from him, do not be shocked at all if somebody else is on the phone within 48 hours. Let's talk for a second about why this backup quarterback conversation matters so much more in Cincinnati than it does for probably 20 other teams in this league. because I think that context gets lost. This is a Bengals franchise that has spent literal decades searching for quarterback stability. Go back through their history, and you will find stretch after stretch of instability at the position before Burrow ever arrived. So, when a team finally hits on a true franchise quarterback, the value of protecting that investment with a legitimately capable backup becomes almost existential for how the front office plans every single roster decision around it. That is exactly why this Josh Johnson situation carries more weight than a typical third-string quarterback battle would anywhere else around the league. It is not just about who holds a clipboard. It is about whether this organization has a real answer if the unthinkable happens again. But hold on. Because while all of this quiet quarterback room math is unfolding behind the scenes, there is a completely different Bengals storyline blowing up across the football internet right now, and this one has absolutely nothing to do with backup roster numbers. This one has to do with Joe Burrow himself, and whether Cincinnati might actually, secretly, somehow be willing to trade their franchise quarterback away. Now, before you panic and start typing an angry comment, breathe with me for a second, because we are going to talk through this like adults, not like people doom-scrolling at 2 a.m. convincing themselves the sky is falling. Here is exactly what sparked this rumor cycle. New York Post reporter Vincent Bonsignor recently put out a report suggesting that multiple league sources see the San Francisco 49ers as a team to watch closely if Joe Burrow were ever to want out of Cincinnati down the road. The reasoning circles back to 2021, when Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch aggressively chased down Matthew Stafford before he eventually got traded away from Detroit to the Los Angeles Rams. According to this report, the theory goes that if Burrow ever hit a genuine breaking point with the Bengals organization, Shanahan and Lynch would supposedly make a similarly aggressive push, potentially putting Brock Purdy and a real pile of premium draft picks on the negotiating table to make it happen. Now look, I completely understand why this headline travels the way it has. You put Joe Burrow's name anywhere near a trade rumor, and it is going to move across timelines instantly, because he is one of the most talented quarterbacks on planet Earth, and people love a shocking hypothetical. But let's actually stress test this thing properly, because as your boy Dre, I am not just here to repeat whatever rumor is trending this week. I am here to tell you what I actually believe is real once you dig past the headline. And this entire theory rests on one absolutely massive assumption sitting underneath everything else, that the Bengals organization completely collapses, that Joe Burrow reaches a Stafford in Detroit level of pure frustration with his own franchise. So ask yourself honestly, does that actually match what we have watched this organization do with our own eyes this offseason? After finishing a rough 6-11 last season, Burrow himself said publicly that this offseason was, in his own words, as big as it gets for the direction of this franchise. That was not a trade demand whispered through back channels. That was a direct challenge thrown at his own front office in public for everybody to hear. And Cincinnati answered that challenge with one of the most aggressive, most decisive offseasons we have watched from this franchise in years, maybe ever. They traded for Dexter Lawrence, an absolute wrecking ball anchoring the middle of that defensive line, and locked him in on a deal running all the way through the 2028 season. They turned around and added Jonathan Allen up front as well, giving that interior a legitimate 1-2-3 punch alongside returning veteran B.J. Hill after losing Trey Hendrickson to the rival Baltimore Ravens in free agency, a loss that genuinely stung a lot of Bengals fans watching it happen. The front office turned right back around and signed explosive pass rusher Boye Mafe away from Seattle, then used a valuable second-round draft pick on Cassius Howell to keep stacking juice onto that defensive front. In the secondary, they went out and brought in two-time Super Bowl champion safety Brian Cook straight from Kansas City, adding real championship pedigree to a group that desperately needed a talent infusion after last year's struggles. That, my friends, is not the offseason blueprint of a franchise quietly preparing for life without their franchise quarterback. That is the offseason blueprint of a franchise going all in, chips pushed to the middle of the table, betting everything on right now. And here is a stat line that I think gets criminally overlooked whenever people start throwing around this Burrow trade talk. Joe Burrow only played in 8 total games last season, and Cincinnati still managed to go 5-3 in those 8 games behind what was statistically one of the worst defenses in the entire league. Joe Flacco stepped in when Burrow went down and lost 2 absolute shootouts by scores of 39-38 and 47-42, and even came within a single field goal of knocking off the eventual AFC champion outright on the road. Now run those numbers just a little bit differently in your head for a second. Swing a couple of those nail-biters the other direction, which genuinely could have happened on another day, and suddenly we are talking about a 10-win football team and a real playoff appearance instead of the frustrating finish that actually happened. That context matters enormously, and it is a completely different situation than what Matthew Stafford lived through year after year in Detroit, where the Lions never built anything close to a real championship-caliber roster around him, and he never won a single playoff game across his entire tenure there. Burrow, meanwhile, gets to go to work every single day alongside arguably the best wide receiver duo anywhere in professional football in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, with real continuity under head coach Zach Taylor heading into another season together, and all 5 starters returning up front on that offensive line. That is, on paper, the best pass protection situation of Burrow's entire NFL career, and every single Bengals fan who has watched him get hit into next week over the years has been begging for exactly this. And on the other side of this so-called blockbuster trade scenario, the report is asking you to believe Brock Purdy is somehow one disappointing year away from getting shipped out of San Francisco entirely. But let's be real about the context there too. The 49ers dealt with absolutely brutal injuries last season across multiple key positions. Their veteran core is another year older across the board, and the NFC West is not exactly a division you casually stroll through anymore. None of those obstacles are really fair to pin on Purdy specifically. So, walk through the full picture here. We are supposed to believe San Francisco sends out their franchise quarterback plus a stack of premium future draft picks, while Cincinnati simultaneously willingly gives up the exact same kind of asset they just spent an entire offseason building a legitimate championship roster around. My honest opinion, and I want you to know this is clearly my opinion and not some confirmed fact, that math does not add up, and I do not think it is even remotely close. Can Kyle Shanahan sit back and admire Joe Burrow from a distance? Of course he can. Every single general manager in this league would love to have a quarterback like that running their offense. Can John Lynch daydream about it during a long flight home from a scouting trip? Sure, why not? Every front office fantasizes about upgrades they will probably never actually get. But admiration is not a transaction, and daydreaming does not move a roster. For this rumor to become anything close to real, the Bengals organization would need to completely fall apart despite spending an entire offseason upgrading their defensive front, adding legitimate proven playmakers on both sides of the ball, keeping their elite receiver duo fully intact, and locking in continuity across an entire returning offensive line. That is a whole lot of dominoes that would all need to fall in exactly the wrong order at exactly the wrong time, and based on everything we have actually watched this front office do with real actions and real money this offseason, I personally do not see that setup coming together anytime soon. Let's talk about how the fan bases on both sides have actually reacted to this rumor cycle too, because that part of the story is honestly pretty entertaining on its own. On the Cincinnati side, you have got a fan base that has watched their front office finally get aggressive after years of being labeled cheap or passive in free agency. And a lot of that fan base is simply exhausted by trade rumors that pop up basically every single offseason, regardless of how the roster actually looks. There is a real sense of, we have heard this one before fatigue setting in among the Houday faithful. Meanwhile, on the 49ers side, you have got a fan base that is understandably intrigued by the idea of adding a quarterback of Burrow's caliber. But even plenty of level-headed 49ers fans online have been pumping the brakes on this one too, pointing out correctly that Purdy has more than earned a legitimate runway to keep proving himself before anybody starts shipping him out for an unproven hypothetical. Let's zoom out for a second and talk about why backup quarterback battles like this one almost never get the national spotlight they probably deserve, because I think that's worth understanding if you really want to get the full picture here. National media loves the splashy trade rumor. It is easy to package, it is easy to argue about. And a name like Joe Burrow attached to a hypothetical blockbuster is going to outperform almost any other football story you can put on a thumbnail. A depth chart battle between a returning veteran and a one-year insurance signing just does not have the same pull for a national audience, even though if you are actually building a roster that can survive a full 17-game season. This is exactly the kind of decision that matters far more day to day. That is part of why you are hearing so much more noise about the Burrow rumor than you are about Josh Johnson's situation, even though the Johnson story is dramatically more likely to actually happen before Labor Day. And it is worth remembering that this is not exactly new territory for a guy like Josh Johnson. Throughout his career, he has been on the wrong end of this exact roster math more times than almost any quarterback in modern league history, and he has kept coming back every single time. Compare his journey to other well-traveled backups like Chase Daniel or Matt Castle, guys who carved out long, respectable careers almost entirely by being the steady professional in a quarterback room rather than the guy under the bright lights on Sunday. Johnson's path has been even more extreme than either of those two, bouncing not just between NFL rosters but out of the league entirely into alternative leagues and back again, which tells you everything about how much he genuinely loves playing this position. That resilience is exactly why, even if Cincinnati moves on, I would be stunned if his phone goes quiet for very long. Now let's flip back to San Francisco for a second, because there is another angle to this Purdy conversation that I think deserves more attention than it has gotten. Brock Purdy signed a significant contract extension not that long ago, and teams do not typically hand out that kind of long-term money to a quarterback they are quietly shopping around the league behind the scenes. Could front offices always change direction if results go sideways? Sure, that is the nature of this business, and nobody's job is ever fully safe, including a starting quarterback's. But using Purdy's name specifically as the centerpiece of a hypothetical Joe Burrow blockbuster when he is coming off real financial commitment from his own organization is exactly the kind of detail that gets lost once a juicy headline starts spreading across timelines. It is a lot easier to imagine a scenario in a tweet than it is to actually execute a trade that clears salary cap hurdles, satisfies both front offices, and gets approved by two different ownership groups. I also want to bring up the Stafford comparison one more time, because I do not think we gave it enough credit for just how different those two situations actually were beneath the surface. When the Lions eventually traded Stafford, that deal came only after years, plural, multiple years, of losing seasons, coaching changes, and a front office that had shown no real signal it was building toward anything resembling a Super Bowl roster. Stafford requested that trade himself, publicly, after reaching an honest breaking point built on real, sustained organizational dysfunction. Compare that to Burrow, who is sitting on a roster that just added Dexter Lawrence, Jonathan Allen, Boye Mafe, and Brian Cook in a single offseason, on a team with continuity at head coach, continuity on the offensive line, and two of the best receivers in football already under contract. Those are not similar situations dressed up in similar language. They are almost opposite situations that just happen to share the surface-level detail of both quarterbacks being extremely talented. So here is how I want you to walk away from this entire breakdown today. Two separate Bengals quarterback stories, sitting in the exact same news cycle, carrying two completely different levels of actual credibility. The Josh Johnson roster situation is grounded in real, verifiable roster math, a returning championship-tested veteran in Joe Flacco squeezing out a depth signing in Josh Johnson, backed up by two independent analysts working for two different outlets, landing on nearly identical conclusions within days of each other. That is the story, with actual teeth behind it, the one that could genuinely become official news within the next few weeks as roster cut deadlines approach. The Joe Burrow to San Francisco rumor, on the other hand, is speculation built on a somewhat shaky historical comparison and a whole lot of what if, propped up right on top of an offseason where Cincinnati spent real draft picks and real dollars, proving the exact opposite scenario the rumor requires to even make sense. One of these stories is football reality quietly playing out behind closed doors. The other one is off-season content engineered to generate clicks and arguments, and hey, I will be honest with you, we are all clicking on it anyway, myself included, because that is just how this business works. Looking further down the road, here is my prediction, and I want to be clear that this is purely my opinion based on everything we have talked through today, not some insider report I am pretending to have. I think Josh Johnson does not make Cincinnati's final active roster out of camp, exactly like these projections suggest, but I also think he lands somewhere else in this league before the regular season even kicks off, because a backup with his experience simply does not sit unemployed for long. And on the Burrow situation, I think this rumor quietly fades away entirely once the Bengals actually start winning games with this retooled defense, because nothing kills a trade rumor faster than a franchise quarterback looking comfortable and protected behind a rebuilt roster that finally has his back. Now I want to hear from you directly. Street Hoops Nation, because this channel only works when you are actually part of the conversation and not just watching passively. Drop it in the comments right now. If you were running the Bengals front office today, are you finding a creative way to keep Josh Johnson around on that practice squad just in case disaster strikes again? Or do you let him walk and go chase a real backup competition somewhere else where he might actually have a better shot at a roster spot? And on the Burrow rumor, be honest with me. Do you think this thing has even a sliver of real substance to it? Or is this pure offseason noise that quietly dies the moment training camp actually opens and pads start popping? If this breakdown helped you separate the real Bengals news from the rumor mill circling around it, smash that like button right now before you scroll away. Drop your honest takedown in the comments, because I genuinely read every single one of them. And if you are not subscribed to Dre Talk Sports yet, what exactly are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button, turn on those notifications, because this quarterback room story is far from finished playing out, and when Cincinnati finally makes their real official roster move, you already know I am going to be the very first one breaking it down for you, start to finish, no filter. Until next time, this is Dre. Stay locked in, stay tuned, and I will see you in the next one.